Collecting evidence from a crime scene can be very time-consuming, tedious, and sometimes gross. There can be anything from cigarette butts to weapons to used condoms found at crime scenes. Anything that you think that might be a piece of evidence should be collected and packaged properly for your investigation. It is vital for your investigation to bring justice to your victims and to capture your perpetrator. Some types of DNA are left behind at crime scenes. It is a very, very important part of crime scene evidence collection. Semen can be left behind at sexual assaults, as well as hair, skin cells under the victim's fingernails, which is usually performed by a sane nurse after a victim has been assaulted. Also, there are water bottles that, with DNA that can be from the saliva. Buccal swabs can be taken, which is a swab inside the victim's mouth. Also, feces, urine, vomit, you can find DNA in all those. Touch DNA, when a person touches an object and perspirates onto it, leaves skin cells, that's another great way of finding DNA. One thing, bottles are important because there's several people who overlook bottles as a form of evidence. A water bottle, for example, the water left in it, or liquor, or whatever it may be, is going to be evidence. Even if you have a glass with liquid in it, you want that liquid to see if there might be drugs in it, whatnot. A good way to not tamper with the evidence of the DNA that might be on the mouthpiece of any kind of container is to poke a little hole in the bottom and let the liquid drain out into a separate container that's labeled as evidence. And then you can package the bottle and also swab the top. And that's a very good way to secure your evidence. Other kinds of evidence are impressions. Tool impressions, tire impressions, shoe mark impressions. They're all very important to collect. Dental casting can be used in dental stone. It takes a while to dry, but it is a very effective way of collecting evidence. Microsil can also be used when it comes to tool impressions, and it can be packaged as trace evidence, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Drugs, other paraphernalia, such as bongs and pipes and baggies, can all be collected. Things left behind, cigarette butts, condoms, clothing, weapons, all of that can be packaged and collected as evidence. Trace evidence, which I mentioned before, is small things. Splintered wood from a broken door, baseball bat splinters, even broken glass can sometimes be reconstructed and turned into evidence for a crime scene. And also, you can match it too. Say a perpetrator breaks in a window and walks through the glass that he breaks. Then you can find the shoe later on, possibly, and be lucky to compare glass that you've collected, and you can see that it's the same type of glass that is found in the perpetrator's shoe. Then right there you have evidence, circumstantial evidence. That's what that is called. Fingernails, fingernail trimmings, hair, especially if it's at the root, is the best because it is the best way to get DNA. It's called nuclear DNA. Fibers from clothing is also important because if you do find a perpetrator and say they left a piece of a orange sweatshirt at the crime scene, and you find this person and you search their home with a search warrant and you find an orange sweater, you can compare the materials and make evidence there. Once again, I believe that is called circumstantial evidence. The ways that you need to collect this stuff is very important. It's very important so that you do not damage your materials, so that your stuff is not compromised, especially when it comes to court. DNA should be swabbed and then packaged in boxes. Like, swabs need to be put in small boxes and they need to be labeled. When you label things, this goes for everything. You need to have your case number, your department number, who it was collected by, when it was collected, what's the date, where it was collected from, etc. DNA can be swabbed. It can be dry swabbed, it can be wet swabbed, it doesn't matter. Taking both is a good idea. If you collect things like a condom that is still wet, if you will, it needs to be packaged in a dry container, such as a box, and then it can be taken and frozen until it is needed to, be processed. Everything needs to be sealed. All the creases, all the seams on bags and boxes need to be sealed and initialed on the tape where you seal it. It is vital so that you do not have your evidence tampered with and compromised, especially when it comes to court, because defense attorneys will eat you up. Fibers, hair, other trace evidence such as the microsil tool mark impression can be put into little coin bags, coin envelopes, or jewelry boxes and sealed, as I just mentioned. The tire marks, tool impressions, and shoe prints, things like that with the bigger stuff, can be packaged in boxes or simply just written on the back of the molding and then put in a bag and sent to the department. Things that are wet, things that you might have urine on them, or semen, or vaginal secretions, spilled liquor that might have drugs in it, those all need to be taken to the station and hung up to dry, or even frozen. Usually if it's cloth, it can be dried, and you will still have your DNA evidence, and you'll still be able to pull what you need off of that despite the fact that it has dried. Clothing and weapons, bottles, other hard, bigger items that are suspected can just simply be bagged or boxed, and they need to be sealed just like everything else. All the seams with the initials over the seams where the tape was put, along with your department number, name, who was collected by, etc. Fingerprints and shoe prints, on the other hand, that's a different way of collection. You need to have the magnetic powder that you use for the fingerprints. It's hard to find fingerprints, and sometimes you have to level yourself out with a flashlight with all the lights off and get low and look at it like this to find your fingerprints and your shoe prints. It can be very difficult because you don't necessarily know what people touch. Sometimes perpetrator will use gloves to enter and use gloves to touch their victim, but they might take off their gloves when they make themselves a drink, something like on those terms, and then you can find fingerprints that way. It is vital that you take the time to look. There's also other equipment you can use, but it is pricey, and the cheapest, most effective way is the flashlights with the lights off, and get low to the ground, low to the surface, and find it yourself. When you dust a fingerprint, you dust it lightly, and then you use a certain kind of fingerprint lifting tape, and you put it onto a clear piece of acetate like you would use on an overhead with a erasable marker. Then you can tape it to a card placard, and you write down the information that you need, just as you would with boxing and packaging anything else. Sometimes a sketch should be involved, and a sketch is usually the best thing to do. Shoe prints are also the same way, except you can lift them with gelatin lifters, which is like a gel piece of paper about this thick, and you just simply lay it over the shoe print and it'll lift up. And then you put it in a folder, a manila folder, and that works well. There's also electrostatic dust lifters, which look like a piece of film, and you can put those in a manila folder as well. The whole crime scene must be sketched, and it must be sketched to scale. Distances between furniture and evidence, the size of the walls, the size of the furniture, all must be measured to scale and sketched. And you can do sketches in different perspectives: aerial, front end, then also photographing, and photographing from all different angles is very important so that depth perception is not off. You need to take them lower, higher, close up, far away. There's many different ways to photograph, and it is very tedious, and it can take a lot of time. It is very important that you do all of these things in order to solve your case. If you overlook something, you can compromise a whole case. You can leave a victim without justice, and you can leave a perpetrator on the streets. It is very important you follow all of these rules when you are collecting evidence. I will show you guys now an example of collecting DNA from a water bottle that I used before, the trusty water bottle. Simply take a cotton swab. Your department will supply you with sterile swabs. You simply just go around it. It can be dry, that's fine. Just make sure you get it real good under the rim and everything, just in case you miss something. This will also be collected too, so just remember that. And you want a dry box and you label it with all of your information, as you can see. Collected, case number, department number, where it was collected from, and you simply just put it in the box and seal it. Simple as that. Another thing too is if you find a jacket, you'll want to use gloves for this. If you find a jacket suspected with blood or semen or whatever, you'd want to put it in a bag. I've already labeled the bag with what you need, department number, etc., who it was collected by. And then the seam, as you can see, is sealed with my initials and evidence tape. I did not have access to the right evidence tape, so I had to make my own here with masking tape. There's also, on the bottom, all of that needs to be sealed. All the little seams need to be sealed up and with the evidence tape and your initials put over them so that the evidence does not get tampered with. You simply pick it up, put it in the bag. Once it's in the bag, you want to fold it up, and once again, you'd use the red evidence tape in order to do this. However, I didn't have access to any. Simply want to tape this down all the way around the back of the bag. And then it would be right here too, all the way across. And then you'd initial it over all the seams so that it cannot be tampered with. That was a very simple way of showing how to collect evidence. It is very important to make sure you have this all done the correct way and in accordance with your department. I hope you learned something today. Thank you very much for listening. This is Hannah Lee on collecting evidence.